Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you, and welcome to Eye on Islam, the show where we look at current affairs through an Islamic lens. Each week we'll look at a news story which has a direct relevance to the beautiful religion of Islam, and we'll break it down from a Muslim perspective. Today we're going to commemorate the 44th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, which culminated in the coming to power of the Islamic Republic in February 1979. And we're going to focus on the Islamic values that this revolution espoused, such as the necessity of governing Muslim societies by the laws of Allah and the need for Muslims worldwide to unite. But first, here's a report looking back at those momentous days in 1979.
On February 1st, 1979, millions of Iranians welcomed the return of their charismatic leader Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the Imam who led a revolution which toppled an oppressive Western-backed regime and changed the course of history. Imam Khomeini's arrival to Tehran following 15 years in exile intensified months of popular protests against the Pahlavi regime. 10 days later, the rallies culminated in the downfall of the regime, ending the more than 2 millennia of monarchy in Iran.
من دولت تعیین میکنم، من تو دهن این دولت میزنم، من دولت تعیین میکنم، من به پشتیبانی این ملت دولت تعیین میکنم، من به واسطه این که ملت مرا قبول دارد.
Imam Khomeini not only stood for Iranian self-determination, but pushed for Muslim unity, strength, and Islamic anti-imperialism, which the Muslim world had yet to see rise to a level which could effectively oust Western hegemony over Middle Eastern countries. The Islamic Revolution also established a new political system, a republic based on Islamic values and democracy. Since the revolution, the lives of Iranians have improved tremendously. Life expectancy has increased from 55 to 76%. Literacy rating risen from 47% to 96.6%, with a medical, sporting, and scientific ranking to rival the world's best, and a powerful military which assists the region's struggle against terrorism and colonialism. Imam Khomeini's revolution proved that Muslims can win against the odds, and Islam can work in a modern political setting.
Well, joining us in the studio today to talk about Iran's revolution and its Islamic significance, I have Masoud Shajare, who is the chairman of the Islamic Human Rights Commission here in London, and also Sister Batul Subaiti, who is a political activist and commentator. Welcome to the show. Thank you both very much for coming on. Now, Masoud, I want to come straight to you because I was surprised to learn you appeared like a young man to me, but you apparently were around during that time, and you may have some memories of the revolution, which I don't have, for example. Could you just tell us, what was it like to go through that period, the real revolutionary decade after the revolution took place?
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I think it's very important to realize what was the environment just before the revolution in Iran, and indeed globally. Islam wasn't recognized as relevant to that time's people's political, social, economical sort of needs. It was seen as a fuddy-duddy sort of Eastern religion, which was something of the past and no relevant to the present. And that's on one side. And the other side, Iran was going through huge sort of difficulties, you know, the dictatorship of Shah, and the fact that economically, politically, Iran was really bottom, and you know, the Shah was number one sort of agent and servant of the West, but it wasn't actually able to do anything for the ordinary Iranian people. There was such an unhappiness within Iran. And I remember going to Iran just a couple of years before. And when I came back, I was talking to everyone and saying, look, it's not going to go on like this. There's going to be a change. I didn't expect it to be so soon, but it was obvious that the the situation in Iran cannot continue like that. You know, the poverty, the injustice, everything was so ripe. But what happened with the revolution was Ayatollah Khomeini brought the spirit of Islam as a revival, as a tsunami, not just for Iran, but the whole world. You know, even in South America, who weren't really followers of Islam by any definition, they were inspired by the revolution of Iran because it stood against the number one stooge of the United States, which was abusing its own people for the benefit of that colonial power. And I think that was something which then, it was a tsunami. It affected the Palestinian movement, it affected the Islamic movement around the world. Islam was seen as a revival tool, an empowering tool, which could actually undermine the tyranny of the time.
Yes, we are going to speak more about the sort of ripple effect that the revolution had on the region, how it's helped other countries, other peoples as well. But Batul, I want to bring you in on this as well, because you perhaps represent a younger generation, of course, who perhaps look to the revolution still. Just tell me, what does the revolution mean to you, and what does it represent for you today? Ultimately,
to me, it represents dignity. It's a manifestation of the ayah from the Holy Quran, كم من فئة قليلة غلبت فئة كثيرة بإذن الله. So how many times have an entity that's small in number and, let's say, material strength has overcome an entity that's much larger in number and material strength by the way of God? So, of course, Islam is the determining factor, and it's the true identity for the people and for the society of Iran, which I think is something that really makes it stand out, is that Islam is not being used as a cover for the interests of those in power. In actual fact, Iran has had to basically let go of many short-term, benefits or interests in pursuit of those higher objectives and in pursuit of those principles. And I see that Iran today in the region is probably the only country that's really standing as an obstacle to the Western imperialist project and has demonstrated that full hand. Not only is Iran stable today, but it's looking to create a new world order, one that constitutes of respect, cooperation, growth, expertise. And look, it's been over 4 decades since the advent of the revolution. Its ideals are still very much within the hearts and minds of the Iranians, and I would say beyond. And I would say that for the younger generation, there's actually overpowering feelings. And we have to understand that this younger generation hasn't actually witnessed the revolution firsthand. It hasn't even witnessed the 8-year war. But look at the way that they, for example, commemorate their martyrs. Look at the way that today they commemorate the likes of Haj Qasim Soleimani. And this is all despite the soft war efforts to basically weaken and to target their faith. So we have to put it within that context. So I think that shows that the revolution has a dynamic understanding of the needs of the younger generation that are inherently attracted to it.
And of course, I think it's worth mentioning that Iran right now is facing a kind of Western pressure campaign, and in specific, they're focusing on things like the women's rights in Iran. Tell me, do you think that the Islamic Revolution has compromised on women's rights in Iran, or perhaps has empowered it, surprisingly, in another way?
I think the Islamic Revolution has actually taken away those factors that would otherwise abuse a woman, essentially. I mean, if you look at the West, for example, you see that a woman is viewed as both a consumer and a merchandise. She's viewed as a product that buys and sells, and her worth is only seen insofar as she generates capital and revenue. Whereas you see that actually one of the core moral values and structures is to focus on the family institution, strengthening the family institution. The role of a mother, for example, that she plays in terms of nurturing the future generations, that's something that's very much focused upon, and the value of a woman inherently and instinctively, as well as her participation in wider society. We see that, for example, the hijab is seen as an essential component to strengthen the family institution and to also facilitate the role of a woman in wider society. Imam Khomeini, very famously, when he was speaking to a group of men, he told them, do you think it is your speeches that have brought down the Shah? It is these very women. Treat them with honor. What he was saying was that these women were leading at the forefront of the protest movements. They were disseminating the education. They were disseminating the information within wider society. The only caveat that I would say was placed was that the hijab is the means and is the vehicle through which a woman can interact in society to maximize that productivity and that effort. So I would say actually the obstacles that would take away a woman's productivity and potential have been removed, and actually she's been respected and honoured for the output that she gives to society, as well as her innate role that she plays as a mother and as a wife.
Well, that's really insightful. Thank you so much for sharing. And Masood, I want to ask you about the work that you've done here in the UK. Has been very much focused on, bringing Sunnis and Shias and different Muslims from different backgrounds together to kind of achieve a joint objective towards empowering Muslims and so on. But that's also something which the Islamic Revolution has tried to achieve on a bigger regional level. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think the fact of the matter is that the Islamic Revolution was a reflection of what the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "At-tasmu bihamdillahi jami'an," and orders you to come together, any Islamic movement has to put that as one of its sort of aims and objectives. Islamic movements, so-called, who think they could go by creating fractions and grouping and theological sort of basis and ignore everyone else, it's going against that verses of Quran and indeed against the concept of Islam. To unite, I mean, look, every Muslim and non-Muslim knows that for us to achieve our aspirations as Muslims, we need to unite. We need to come together for those issues. And indeed, we need to even unite with others other than Muslim for those issues. To be involved in sort of sectarianism and so forth, it actually is counterproductive to that. So it was absolutely essential for the Islamic movement and the Islamic Revolution to have that as one of its aims and objectives. And I think that's essential for any Islamic movement.
Yes, of course, sectarianism is a poison which has plagued the region for far too long, and it's great to see that there is a nation, the Islamic Republic, in the Middle East, which is fighting against that. However, before we continue this discussion, I want to bring in and remind ourselves of a particular Quranic verse, which is often associated with the Islamic Revolution. The verse in the 5th surah of the Quran tells us that Allah will always replace those who turn away from Him with people who are better and who will strive in the path of God, no matter how the disbelievers dislike it.
فسوف يأتي الله بقوم يحبهم ويحبونه أذلة على المؤمنين أعزة على الكافرين يجاهدون في سبيل الله ولا يخافون لومة لائم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله واسع عليم.
Well, let's come back to the discussion now. Batul, I want to come back to you on this because one thing which Iran has done very, very well since 1979 until now, which doesn't get nearly enough coverage, particularly in Western mainstream circles, is the effort that they've done to combat extremism, combat terrorism. In fact, Iran has played a huge role in defeating notorious terrorist groups like Daesh, for example, in Iraq. Perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit more for us.
Absolutely. I think at the crux of it, Iran has an open hand policy. So that is every oppressed individuals, no matter what their background is, no matter what their religion is, no matter what system of governance they have in place, they will unite on the basis of causes and on the basis of those inherent values. So we see that, for example, when Iran had to fight, because Iraq had invaded essentially during the Iran-Iraq war, that did not stop it. The fact that the whole world was, besieging and sanctioning Iran and all kinds of weapons and ammunitions were used against them, still then when they were at their lowest point in terms of material strength, did they still reach their hands out to the Palestinians to support them essentially in their fight against the occupation. It did the same thing in Lebanon. Iran was crucial in the formation of Hezbollah and in their support, this Lebanese liberation group, which essentially defeated Israel in 2000 and drove them out. And Haj Qasem Soleimani is one of the individuals who is hailed as having a key role to play, essentially, in the imparting of the strategic, basically, advice and training that he had. So ultimately, what it is that Iran has a vision. And that vision is that wherever there is oppression, that oppression needs to be uprooted. And that oppression is uprooted by giving the necessary support to those individuals on the ground and training them such that they can become self-sufficient to fight that enemy. The overcoming of the enemy won't happen unless the individuals themselves on the ground want that to happen. So, for example, we see that even within the Palestinian liberation groups, they would train them how to create bullets, for example. They would train them how to create these tunnels. Rather than making them kind of dependent, they would seek to make them self-sufficient. And it sees the struggle as one united struggle against a greater enemy. So it's like Imam Khomeini defined America as the great Satan. So anyone that wants to support in weakening the hegemony of America, we will support in that pursuit. We will unite for that objective, essentially.
And it's interesting, isn't it, how nowadays you find that Iran has a relationship with many countries around the world who are not Muslim majority. Venezuela, for example, Iran has played a role in helping them. So, Masood, I'm going to come back to you because it seems to me as if you look at how Iran is now to how it was back before 1979, the misconception is that Islam removes human rights, that Islam is anti-education for women, that type of thing. But actually, surprisingly, women education is at an all-time high in Iran. Literacy level has improved since the revolution, that type of thing. And now Iran is a world competitor in the field of sciences, sport, and so on. So perhaps you could elaborate on that point as well for us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, what the sister said regarding the saying of Imam Khomeini, rahmatullah, that women were instrumental in bringing the revolution. They were also the actual beneficiaries. They benefited a lot more than the men as a result of the revolution. The number of sort of women at universities, the number of judges, the number of the lecturers and professors and politicians, it really is not possible to compare it with Shah's time. At the Shah's time, the freedom for the women was dependent on the inches of the skirts. The higher it went, there were more freedom. Well, here you could actually measure it by empowerment of women to take their rightful place. But also, I think Iran, although was the number one importer and buying weapons from United States, when the war took place, Iran was not capable, didn't have the resources, except the manpower and the dedication of the Mujahideen to actually defend itself. Now Iran is a regional power. And when you look at all the other technology, you see that Iran is number 5, number 4, number 7 in the world, despite all the sanctions and everything. I think what is really important is that we need to ask the question, why is it Iran being singled out with this sort of attack by global sort of West, day in, day out? Is it really anything to do with the human rights, for example? When we see the Saudis have actually given death penalty for someone for tweeting, and the world is completely silent. And then in Iran, someone gets death penalty for killing people in the demonstration in front of the international community and on the cameras. Then there is a huge opposition. So we need to actually be able to have a filter to understand that, what is going on. There are at the moment 127 channels beaming sort of Farsi into Iran. I mean, this is not economical. This has all been fabricated. This has all been organized. This is really a tool of trying to undermine a country which is not just standing for is independent, but also is the aid for all others, including Venezuela, including South America and elsewhere.
You've mentioned, of course, a kind of criticism campaign against the Islamic Republic that does exist. Criticism ranges from things like they claim it's a dictatorship. They claim that, Iran is being expansionist and is trying to pursue some kind of Persian empire building project in the Arab world, that type of thing. How would you respond to this type of criticism? What would you say about it?
Look at forget the spins. Look at the reality. Look at the statistic. Look at the history. Iran hasn't invaded any country, for hundreds of years. Iran has actually, as the sister said, helped and support others to be able to empower themselves against one of the greatest atrocities against them, like the Palestinians, like the Lebanese, like Venezuela. It really is not even there to sort of colonize everywhere else, is there to help and support, despite the fact that itself is under huge pressure, sanctions.
But Tool, I want to bring you in because we haven't got a lot of time left before the end of the show. Again, I want to give you a chance to respond to some of the criticism. Other criticisms include, for example, that it's a revolution for Shia Muslims. This is a Shia Muslim majority country. It's ultimately for them only. That's their main interest. How would you respond to that?
I just want to respond to the thing before that, and that is on the point of dictatorship. And it
Sure.
is that Iran is a very active and energetic nation. So in 1979, the whole world was seeking to crush this revolution. That was the whole point of the 8-year war. That's the whole point of the economic sanctions that we're seeing today, that Iran has turned from a challenge to an opportunity. So essentially, for someone to come and to say that it's a dictatorship, okay, Iran right now is being sanctioned for this revolution. Who is maintaining this revolution? What is its support base? Its support base is the people. Because where else is it going to get that support? It doesn't have any kind of foreign support. And if you look at the inherent institutions within Iran, they're in such a way that they rest on the people. They're made up of the masses of the people. And they're designed to monitor each other. For example, just take the IRGC, the Basij, for instance, these different institutions. So if really and truly the Iranian nation today did not want an Islamic Republic, and the world is telling Iran that if you get rid of this Islamic Republic, we will remove these sanctions away from you, it doesn't make sense to say that the people in Iran actually are not happy and want to remove the system. Yes, they have their criticisms. Of course, they have their criticisms like in any other country. But what actually the people in Iran are asking for is for the government to get closer to the Islamic ideals. It's to get closer to the models. They have a problem with the reformist ideologies that is, bringing about more of a neoliberal model. That's the kind of internal critique. A lot of internal criticism happens not to remove the Islamic component. It's like, this revolution is meant to be based on full social justice. So we want to see more of that being enacted within internal policies. And of course, Iranians are very, very smart and politically aware and read. So they're aware of what the external reality is like. They're aware of the machinations of the enemy, essentially. And in terms of this question about it being, Shias, I think, like Brother Masoud was saying, the reality speaks for itself. If Iran is going out, if Imam Khomeini went out of his way to cut ties with South Africa because of the apartheid, if Iran goes out of its way to be the only entity to ship oil and fuel to Venezuela that's under the same sanctions for the same pretext that Iran is in, and that is because it's trying to carve out its own trajectory in its own line. If Iran goes out of its way to support the Palestinian Liberation Group like Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Haj Qasem Soleimani even himself stressed that we don't give weapons and support on the basis of whether you are Sunni, whether you are Shia, what your background is. You either surrender to the enemy or you face the enemy. That is ultimately what determines whether we will be supporting you or it's futile essentially.
Unfortunately, Batul, we are out of time, but I think you've summarised your point very, very effectively. And to you, Sir Masood, thank you to you both for joining me, and thank you for everyone at home for tuning in as well. But don't worry, next week we'll be back for another edition of Eye on Islam. But for now, it's Assalamu Alaikum.